Mr. Ajaero, a lot of people are concerned that Labour is supposed to be fighting for Nigerians, but at the situation of things now, Labour is more like fighting for itself. Why should they trust you?
Well, why will, in the first instance, why will Nigerians think that they should put their destiny in the hands of Labour? I don't think it's a good assumption. You know, Nigerians on this issue, especially of pump price increase, should equally come out to maintain their position, to say what they want. And let me say this on this station. In 1988, I was a student union leader, and the NLC was banned. It was under chains. And Babangida's we had to stage a protest against Babangida's anti-SAP program. The NLC was not there. The program was successful. The strike was successful. The protest was massive all over the country, which led to the formation of MAMSA, DFRI, and People's Bank, you know, which Babangida said he was working towards creating 1 million jobs. And that is Nigerian people, mainly driven by NANS. Now, I still believe that if Nigerian people believe that the program, they don't like it, you don't wait for Labour, you know, to be the only organization that will speak for you. But Labour will do that in collaboration, you know, with other stakeholders, the Congress of Nigerian political parties, the civil society group, the NGOs, the market women, the students. All of us must come together to discuss.
I like to look at the strike action now by Labour, because even though your own group hasn't started its own strike action yet, perhaps bring us up to speed on how best you can carry out your strike. If Mr. A says he's not for strike and he goes to work, does Labour have the right to barricade or block the highways or the roads, preventing people from going about their business?
Well, there are two issues which I want you to understand. One, what I'm seeing now is protest. You know, Labour has the right with other civil society groups to protest. To that extent, I don't think they equally have the right, because we practice this every day, you know, to ask the other person who is working not to work. But if in the process of their protest, you know, the other person is affected, that's where the issue of, you know, making sure that the protest is peaceful. You know, ordinarily, you know, when you give a strike directive and you say it's either stay at home or you picket or any other form, or even you can go to work and refuse to work to rule is acceptable. Go slow is another form of strike, and then strike has a process of managing it. You know, so I don't think that Labour does that by force, except by implication, by extension. You know, their protest or their action is affecting, you know, the operation of the other group, and that is why if you watch most Labour protests, you know, you see the law enforcement agencies trying to maintain law and order, you know, but not by breaking the strike or protest. And
also by implication, I think someone can also bring up some take up some legal action against Labour if you prevent someone, for instance, who's critically ill from getting to the hospital, and your action has cost that person some untoward health damage or even life. Labour can also be taken to court.
Well, I think what we are talking about now has to do with life, and that is why we have, even if you watch most of those protests, even when we are doing May Day, you have all these ambulances around, you know, because that is why you have the essential services, even in Labour, you know, even the provision made in law, you know, because if you watch some petroleum, electricity, medical, some of those ones and bank belong to, you know, the essential services provision, and they give notice, you know, to keep government, you know, informed, so that they will make provisions for alternatives in the event of their going to a strike action. So the issue of enforcing that right, if somebody is going to hospital and they couldn't access the hospital, I don't think that Labour will equally prevent anybody in such a critical stage from having access to medical attention.
Well, as it is now, I mean, how do you think that your negotiation with federal government is going to be successful when the other group is on the street?
Well, the negotiation is the negotiation between labor and government. Now, even in the choice of representatives, my group has its own number. The other group have their own number. The TUC have their own number. And government has its own number. So it's not like it's my group going to negotiate with government and impose it on the other. No. But already, the TUC have brought the list of their representatives. We have brought the list of our representatives. The other group are supposed to bring the list of their representatives. Now, in this process, if it doesn't succeed, these three groups can still come out and take a unified action, towards this process. Now, the issue is that do you take action before talking, or do you talk? And if you couldn't get what you want, you take an action. I think it's in terms of the modalities and the process to be followed that we are battling with.
What happens if at the end of the day, maybe your group eventually not satisfied with the way the negotiations have gone? Are you then going to eventually now hit the streets, or has any agreement been signed yet?
Well, the issue is that we looked at issues, the policy, the action that is a meeting reaction, and said, look, let a committee go through them. Now, in the process of that committee, where the parties are involved, not agreeing at something, then there is already a dispute. There's already a disagreement. And then in Labour Palace, at that point, you can go out and give the proper notice for an action and commence that action. And I don't think any law can fault you in this process. So if we are dissatisfied with the process or the agreement reached, we pull out and look at other options, including the strike option, including the protest, including picketing. Those are options left for us if the negotiation fails.
How have you been able to manage running the affairs of your own faction of NLC, check of dues and others? How do you get all of that?
Well, check-off dues are paid by industrial unions, and to unions to the center where they are affiliated to. So the unions with us run their check-off dues, run their day-to-day activities, either these visits, either meetings, either travels, whatever, they fund it through their own check-off dues process.
Deeply in your heart, are you happy with this division in the NLC?
Clearly not. But you see, that is part of our historical accident. Before the NLC election, or even in the history of NLC, and I know that the veterans have equally stated this, you can't run an NLC without the bank union. You can't run an NLC to be effective without the electricity union. You can't run an NLC to be effective without the petroleum union. And we have always elected officers based on sectoral leaning. Now, the last NLC president was Abdulwahid Omar, and there was an agreement with all the unions that this leadership must go to the private sector. And halfway, you see a level of injustice and division, and that is why I said now, what you are seeing is the NLC with me being private sector dominated and the other NLC. So you see a situation whereby even what is taken to government for discussion is purely civil servant. If somebody from any state government employee is sacked, NLC goes on strike. If somebody is, there's no increase in salary in the civil service, NLC goes on strike. And we said, look, there is need for us to harmonize this. In the private sector, everything is done by the individual unions. Nobody cares about what happened to them. And the process of trying to bring this together now saw the same division. So that was the division that has now expanded. Even in the process of maybe sending proposal to the federal government on even minimum wage, you come out with an amount that even may not be tenable in the electricity sector, an amount that is not even tenable in petroleum or even in bank. Now, what matters is that whatever the civil servants want, that is what NLC is driving. And the agitation became so much And that is what brought us to where we are today. So until such a time we are ready to harmonize the feelings and the aspirations of the unions in the private sector who suffer casualization, who are sacked almost on a daily basis without anybody crying for them, and that of the public sector, then we can have a unified NLC that will fight for all.
Well, speaking of which, what has your union done about those who are being sacked now, as you mentioned, both in the banks and in several other sectors?
Well, that is, if you watch, you know, for those of you who follow the trend, even during the sack in Ikeja electricity, you know, you discover that it is my own group, and you are hearing NLC, you know, that went there to protest their interests. You know, you still see that since this so-called division, you know, my own group have decided to concentrate, you know, their attention on the issues that affect the private sector. You know, the banks and other areas, you know, who have, in the case of maybe Diamond Bank, we've done a letter to them to start the process of unionizing there, and so many other areas. So it's like we are concentrating attention on what is happening in that sector. But NLC, being an umbrella union that covers people from all these areas, should have been able to coordinate them together. I'm telling you that for years, the private sector were suffering. Even the minimum wage thing we are talking of now, some of the unions in the private sector have gone beyond that because they are particularly interested, you know, in what is happening in their sectors. They pursue this alone. Only God knows how many people have been sacked in the electricity sector that the NLC didn't even bother to even issue a statement, talk less of striking. How many people have been sacked by the oil companies in the banks? You know, so these are some of the agitation and that has led to the division in the NLC today.
So in other words, we have two NLCs, one for the private sector, one for the public sector.
Yeah, one predominantly for the private sector, one predominantly for the public sector.